Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing another update video on the Ranger. In the last one you saw us walk through the front of the truck as well as the cab of the truck. Now we're going to go through some of the updates on the rear that Christian's been working on. Rather than just going front to back, what's the thing that you're most excited about that you want to walk through?
All the storage.
All the storage?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we could do these rear ones, I guess, first, since we're right here. These, basically the whole concept with this truck is Ryan doesn't have a tow truck or a trailer to take this thing to the desert with. So this will be driving from his house to the desert, getting beat on all weekend and driving home. So within that, he has to be able to take everything that he needs and be self-contained within this truck. So storage was one of those big things that he needs on this thing, to be able to take all his camping gear, all his spares, his tools, all that stuff has to be able to be put on this truck and then taken to the desert. Some of it will get offloaded when he gets out there. Some of it will stay on the truck for good. So we'll kind of go through all that stuff. There's a compartment for pretty much everything now, which is pretty cool. So these storage boxes back here, you can kind of see, I guess we could look from the back real quick. Kind of closes off everything on the back of the truck now, which I really like. You don't see, because this truck doesn't have a tailgate on it, you don't see all the way through, like to the top side of the tires or anything like that. It kind of just adds like a faux tailgate, if you want to call it that, to the back of the truck and just kind of boxes everything off. But these are just big, massive storage boxes that I added. I basically just did I drew these in Fusion 360 and then had Jimmy at San Diego Laser Cutting cut these things out for me and press brake them, and then I assembled all of them and welded them together. But they just go on each side of the back half, and these will hold literally whatever. So this will be more than likely a bunch of camping equipment, his sleeping bag, just clothes, literally all that kind of stuff will go in each one of these. And what's cool, we kind of came up with this idea. Now, once these things got put in, is like if we're going to a truck meet or something like that and we take the truck over there, these are gonna have drain holes in them, and it's just a big aluminum box. So what we'll probably end up doing with these, at some point down the road, I guarantee this will end up happening, we'll fill one of these up or both of them up with ice, throw a bunch of drinks on them, and we'll just turn them into big coolers. So these definitely did take a lot of time to figure out, especially with the lids on these, because of the way that everything needs to hinge open and close. These I do want to be completely sealed off. This lid will have a full perimeter seal on it when it's all said and done and coated, just because if you do have clothes in here, if he's thrown a jacket in here, whatever it may be, I don't want that stuff to get hammered dirty, especially being this far back on the truck. The tires will kick up a lot of dust. This whole back section of the truck usually sees a lot of dust. So having these be completely sealed off was a big thing for me. So the lids specifically, because of the way that they hinge, if you want to look at this, like even if you just watch this back section right here,
yep,
with this lid being flat like this and the hinge being further away, if this just had a normal hinge on it, this section of the lid would crash into the box. But with the style of latch that I'm using, everything kind of hinges away, and now you can see like there's an opening here. Yep. So it picks the lid up first, and then it hinges everything, kind of like a factory hood hinge on a car. It kind of picks it up first to get it away from everything, and then hinges it out to clear everything the way that it needs to. So like figuring out those latches was that took some time. And shout out to Nick Darger. He helped me figure out where to get these latches from. And then these are using the same, just like arrow style latch setup, basically what everything else has, which we'll get to in a second, but it has those same style latches that holds everything down. So those are on both sides. They're massive. They'll be able to store literally whatever he wants. And then we can kind of move up to, I guess we can, since we're right here, we can talk about this too. So this is all the fueling setup for the fuel cell on this truck. I ended up having to make a custom fill plate for this fuel safe cell, because there's so much stuff being mounted to the fill plate now. There isn't just a generic option that you can buy from like Fuel Safe, for example, that has everything that I needed for this truck. So I ended up just figuring out what the bolt pattern was and then making my own plate. I just cut it out of 3/16 steel and then had everything set up for exactly what I want. So the fill plate has obviously this big fill neck on it. We have the pickup and the return lines, which are both -6 for this V6. It doesn't need anything bigger. When he ends up going to a V8 down the road, if that ends up happening, the feed line will end up getting bumped up to a -8, but the return will always stay at a -6. So it's not that hard to replace a couple AN lines down the road. It's a very quick thing, but I don't want this truck to be overfueled, like going to the rail, the factory fuel rail, and then having problems with the factory fuel pressure regulator and all that stuff, just over pressurizing it, because this does have an aftermarket like Bosch 044 style pump on it, and that flows a lot more fuel than what the factory setup does. So I'm just trying to prevent some issues going with the smaller line, more close to what the truck had factory, so all the factory engine stuff doesn't have any problems. And then there's also a sending unit in here, and what that's doing is just reading his fuel level. So that's just like a sender basically. So he'll be able to have a working fuel gauge in there, which we touched on in the last video with the gauge on the dash. So that'll get wired up directly to this.
So is that for this cell specifically?
Yes.
Okay.
It's specifically made for these trucks. It's a generic thing for these fuel cells. So you get them in a whatever the length is, and then you cut it down based on what fuel cell you're trying to put it in. Okay. So there's a range that you can cut it. So I cut it down, got it all set up for this tank. And then if you look on this side, there is the vent. So this is the first time that I've ran this style vent. And it's basically just, if you look inside of there, it's basically just like two big ping pong balls sitting inside of there. And what that's doing is it's basically just like a check valve. So if this truck ends up upside down, the main spot that the fuel ends up coming out of is the fuel cell, potentially. So to prevent that, the vent line is the main thing. Typically that would just dump fuel out of it, because that ends up just venting obviously to atmosphere. So having this style setup on here, when the truck's upside down and the fuel starts to try and come out of the vent, the ping pong balls, ping pong looking things, ping pong ball looking parts in there.
Let's call them ping pong balls.
Yeah, they end up going and capping the line off, closing the line so fuel cannot escape out of the vent. And then we do have the nice and bougie geyser cap on here. So this is a dual function. If he ever gets into a situation where someone only has a dump can, he can use the dry brake system on here, or it's just a quarter turn. You pop it off and you can fill it like a normal gas tank. So when he's at the pump, he'll just pop the cap off like that, stick the nozzle in here. He will have to hold it obviously because this is so big.
Yep.
He'll have to sit here and just manually hold the nozzle and just pump fuel. But this cap is very nice. That's one thing that's kind of weird about these pre-runners, is this is really the only option you have for a very nice looking fill cap. And when you're building a truck to this extent, having a nice looking fill cap, it's right in your face always. It's always going to be somewhere where it's super visual. So you might as well have something that's really nice. And this is the nicest option you can have as of right now. So
cool. And then that's just mounted to the chassis itself.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just the tab's mounted to the chassis, and then there's two bolts up here that actually mount the actual neck and everything. There's tabs that come off of that's welded to the neck, and then they both bolt together. So I'll be able to pull this thing off, have the neck actually powder coated or painted so it's nice and coated, and then it'll just bolt to the chassis. And then if he ever needs to get the fuel cell out, just unbolt everything, it all comes out.
Cool. So yeah, that kind of tidies that up, the storage, which you can see clears the tire and everything. It's press broke there for that.
Yes.
Will almost act sort of like a mud flap. Doesn't go down super low, but
so it's funny you say that. Ryan and I are talking about putting actual mud flaps on the back of this thing, just because we think it's cool. Okay. It's there, like it is serving a purpose because it's going to prevent rocks from flying to the back of this thing. But I think just visually with the truck, I think having a mud flap that just hangs off the bottom of the box and hangs down, and then I'll put a Vital Designs logo on there and just have it riveted on, I think will just look super cool.
Jumping forward a little bit, you do have the additional storage box here.
So there is this guy right here, and we can pop this guy open. This one is holding the jack. I think we've gone over all the stuff that goes in here, but the lid was not on it. Right. So now that this is covered, you can kind of get the idea of what's going on here. So we got all of our oils, so engine oil and then trans fluid. We got our jack in here, jack handle, and then we also have a gallon of coolant. So if he needs any of this stuff, he can just pop this open, get to it real quick. But at least with the lid on here, especially with the jack, like our jack is exposed. And over time, if the truck's sitting out in the sun, which this thing will be doing, the jack just ends up getting absolutely hammered. It'll start just fading out, rusting, doing all sorts of stuff. So it's better to have, this is his old jack. We're gonna end up putting a brand new jack in here, so it's all nice. But like having the jack sealed off and just away from the elements for the most part, at least the sun exposure, will save this thing for a long time.
And then you use a more traditional style hinge here, and then the kind of latches, which you were noting. Is there a specific name for those style latches?
Arrow latch is what they're called.
Okay, and that's just because of it's flush with the rest of the
Well, it's
panel.
used in aviation.
Right.
So it's like an arrow. This is very common in like aerospace stuff, which is where this came from. But they're literally just called arrow latches.
Yeah, I've also seen them in some drag racing applications
Yeah.
as well. Anywhere where you don't want something protruding above the surface to cause a bunch of drag, it makes sense to have it.
Yes. Which in this application doesn't really matter.
Oh, we're
For
optimizing for aero and off-road. That's the biggest
Yep.
concern.
I don't think so. So we got that storage there. You can see the whole top of the truck is paneled in now. That's another thing. So there is the storage here. There's a little fill panel here. Then we have some more fill panels that go around like where the junction comes down for all these tubes from the top of the cab. They have their own plates because to be able to get all this tin work in here, there has to be bigger openings. So like I can pop this off right here because there's no screws in it right now. It's like with this off, you can see same kind of thing. Still has a return on it, just like everything else that I've done. So this has a return, but this just allows this main panel to be able to get fit into place around the tube work. Because once this is in, you can see the shape of this guy right here. There's no way in hell you're gonna get that panel into here on both sides and around all this stuff with having that shape on there.
Yep.
So that's just a nice little cap plate that goes on there, and that gets screwed in with the same kind of hardware that all this stuff is using.
Okay. Yeah, and this is all very small hardware.
Yes.
What is this exactly?
It's a number 6 screw.
Okay.
So that it's just a number 6 screw to hold all this stuff in. It doesn't need to be anything big. It's literally, there's so much hardware on here too that like it's honestly kind of overkill, but it's just going smaller on hardware. Basically what set it up was all these latches or the hinges that I got are set up for this size hardware.
Okay.
So that's kind of what dictated what
You
was
just
going
follow
on
through.
for everything else. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, any other access panel, these little beauty plates, and then also the venting.
Yes.
For that as well.
So we got this storage here. That's for all that stuff down inside of there. And we also have this storage box here. So this is a fully sealed off contained box that goes up in here. And what this is doing is going to be holding all of his tools. So he's going to have tool rolls that hold all of his sockets, wrenches, all that kind of stuff. That will all go inside of here. So it has its own contained kind of like storage box. You could also see too, same kind of concept. This has a return flange on it. So the main panel has a return. So when everything comes down, again, everything sits nice and flush when this gets tightened up. So there will be a seal on this one as well. So that will kind of take up, there's a little bit of slack in this one. And that's because the flange that this arrow latch is actually mounting to is really thin. It's just the sheet metal that all this stuff is made out of. By the time the seal gets put on here, it'll add tension to everything, and then this will sit nice and tight. So that guy's in there for tool storage. You can kind of see these tabs on here too. We'll talk about this in a minute, but these are for a Baja rack that gets sat on here. And then there's pull pins that get mounted to those tabs to hold the rack in place. So he can be able to put a bunch of stuff on there, and we'll get to that. Another thing with the paneling, you can see all the cutouts up here in the mesh. So what that's doing is just allowing all the hot air to extract out of the truck. If you've seen in the previous videos, right underneath where this panel work is, there's an X pipe for the exhaust that follows the back of the cab. So it's coming up along the back side of the cab, and then it comes out and comes to the tips out here in the panel work. That spot up there in the center of the back half is it's gonna be a crazy hot spot, because it's basically that section of the back half from the axle forward is a kind of a dead spot for airflow. Like when the truck's moving, like air is not flowing in there. So the more venting you can have for that hot air to escape, especially when the batteries are here, you want to get all that air out of here as much as possible, the hot air coming from the exhaust. All that stuff will be wrapped, but just having an adequate amount of venting like that, just to let that air get out as fast as it possibly can, is very beneficial. And then you can see on that side, but where the tip kind of exits out of the side of the back half, I'm using that same mesh. And that's just closing off. Right on the back side of that is where the exhaust tip is at, and it follows that same shape as what the cutout is in the exhaust, or in the panel. So the exhaust is right behind there. And I wanted to do that just because, like, have the exhaust tip be hidden, just because I think it's very clean. You don't see like some crazy looking tip coming out of the back of this thing like most pre-owners have. It just kind of keeps things more sleek, as well as with the way that these sway bar arms are. When these sway bar arms cycle up, it doesn't leave you much room for these tips to like come out of the back half, and I didn't want them coming out of the center of the truck and I didn't want these tips pointing to the sky because, again, this thing being driven on the street and being parked in a like a garage, or not in a garage, like in someone's driveway. I don't want like water getting into the exhaust system. So having everything like closed off and just kind of tucked away was the best move for me on this thing. And then also on that side as well, you can see the 2 terminals, and those are for just jumping posts. They're just external jumping posts to be able to either jump the battery or trickle charge the battery if you need to. So with where these batteries are located in this truck, it is very tough to get to them unless you start pulling a bunch of tin work out. So if he, for whatever reason, this truck does have 2 batteries, but if one battery for whatever reason ends up going dead, he can throw a trickle charger on that or have another truck try and jump him. And that will be the most beneficial way of going about that.
Cool. Moving up a little bit, I do see that you have the antenna mounted as well as the rear facing bar. Yeah, I guess why run a bar like this and go that route?
So the bar is, you can see right here, this is a Baja Designs rear tail light. What this has is multiple functions to it. So we knew this truck obviously is gonna need some dust lights. There's no way around that. Any pre-runner style truck, you need to have rear facing amber light that is projecting through the dust so people can see you from behind. So that has this function in it. It also has taillights incorporated into it, as well as blinkers, and then it also has a center cargo light, so like a white light that will shine in the middle, which the white portion, like the cargo light, is blocked by these center down tubes, but it's still projecting enough light back here. It will project enough light back here to be able to be used exactly as it needs to. And then the ambers are inset just offside of that, and then your taillights are off that on the outsides. So it should work super good. It killed a bunch of birds with one stone because we were trying to figure out where the dust lights were going to go. We were just going to run like a Baja Designs S1 or S2 on each side, and then we both wanted to have a second set of taillights on the truck as well. So if he wasn't running bedsides, he'd still have taillights projecting off the back of the truck so people can see when he's braking.
Yep.
And then they also have the turn signal function on them, which is very cool. And then the race radio antenna just kind of comes off. I really like the way that turned out. It's just a nice, simple, clean tab, but it's mounted right in that main junction where everything comes together, and then it just holds that antenna off.
So with that, should we go ahead and throw the Baja rack on here and see what that looks like?
Yeah, we could throw the rack on here. There we go. We're all Baja racked up, dude.
A little quick transition, just like that.
So this, you can see there's just 4 pull pins on the underside that go to those tabs. They do have tethers on them, so these pull pins will be mounted to the chassis with the tether so they don't get lost. They'll probably go to the rack, not to the back half. So that way when you pull everything off, they come out with the rack instead of staying on the chassis. But this will hold a big tote. So with his camping stuff, he has a big tote that he normally uses that holds like a stove and stuff like that. So that will sit here perfectly, like this is made for that. And then he'll have a cooler that sits up here. So the design behind this, there's really not that, like, there was thought put into it, but it was more so just like thinking about what it's doing. All these radius corners or edges, that is for tie downs to hold everything. And then it's also locking in, like in the back, it's locking in the tote in all directions. Same thing up here, it's just locking everything in and giving you a point to tie everything down to. So instead of doing like like the base structure you can see is all mitered corners, instead of just doing 2 of those, like stacking them on top of each other and having the same thing, it's just cutting down on material being used, so it's lightening up the rack doing it this way. And that's also just adding some radius to everything just to match everything else going on the back of the truck.
Sure, yeah, I like that a lot. There's also some structure underneath.
Yeah, so everything, where the main pieces are going, there's a big X through this section, and then there's an X through this section as well, just tying in strength to everything too. This point right here, like where it kind of necks down to fit between the down tubes, that was kind of a weak point I saw in my eyes. So that's where the X comes in and ties into, and this X ties into as well, just to tie all that stuff together and just kind of strengthen everything up as well. But it's just a very simple, clean, just to the point kind of structure. Try to keep it as light as possible. It's all 1-inch 095 structure, which is probably overkill still, but I don't want this thing flexing or breaking down the road, especially with the weight that's going to be sitting on it. If he ends up doing like Mojave Trail, for example, this rack will stay on the truck the entire time with the tote and the cooler. So when you're off-roading and you have all that weight on here, I don't want this thing cracking down the road. So just kind of build it overkill to begin with.
The other thing is if Ryan decides to take this to a race, you can just stand up here and you got a bird's eye view.
As soon as this thing got done, when he came over to look at it, he's like, he's like, do you think it'll hold enough weight to like stand on? And I'm like, yeah, get up there. And he was like scared to stand on it. So like I got up there and I was like standing on it. He's like, dude, like that's a perfect spot to like watch a race from. And I'm like, yep, pretty much. So underneath the truck here, we do have limit straps in, and these are just mounted same way as we were talking about in the front. Same kind of tab setup, just to keep everything nice and happy with running dual straps like this. So these are a 24-inch strap that this truck is running. The rear of this truck is cycling on the straps, roughly 23 inches of wheel travel. It could be a little bit more. The main thing that's limiting the rear end of this truck, the shocks will stroke more, the drive shaft is happy, it will go more. The main thing is the length of the sway bar arms, and that was just a packaging thing. So another thing too is we do have the drive shaft in here. This was made by Drive Shaft Pro down off Marina Boulevard here in San Diego. This drive shaft is running a 1350 yoke on the drive shaft side, or on the third member side, and then on the transmission side, it's still running the factory like Ranger output yoke, just to be able to keep everything compatible with what's going on. And then this does have the slip in the drive shaft instead of having it at the tail housing now. So it just should keep everything happy back here and not trying to just absolutely disintegrate the tail housing on the drive shaft. And then, can you see up in here? Can you see this drive shaft loop?
Yep.
Cool. So this, I added this after the drive shaft got put in. So this is just protecting everything if in case the yoke on this side, on the transmission side, ends up just exploding, which is not a super common thing, but it does happen on some trucks if you're not being careful and like maintaining everything and like checking your yokes or your U-joints. So what this is doing is if that yoke ends up just letting go and just exploding, this drive shaft will stay within this loop instead of just flinging itself up and just destroying all this tin work on the floor. It just kind of keeps everything in check and exactly where it needs to go. Sometimes dudes will run like a half moon shape like this on the top side to protect the chassis, and then on the bottom side they'll run a limit strap that just hangs down. I like the look of this where it's just a full steel loop that just goes all the way around the drive shaft. It does make it a little bit, actually it doesn't make it any more tricky to work on or anything like that, because you're just sliding the drive shaft out. And then it's just mounted to the chassis with some 1-inch tubes. So this is like a consumable part. It's meant to be, if your drive shaft lets go, this thing's gonna get destroyed, but at least it's not destroying everything else on the truck. So this will just be easy to cut out, just 2 1-inch tubes, cut that out, remake this real quick, and then throw it back in the truck and you're ready to go. We also have all the fuel lines ran, so everything is just like soft line hose, all fuel rated hose, but it's no hard lines or anything super crazy. Just running all -6, everything like we were talking about. You can see the fuel pumps in here. We got a pre and post filter off each side of the pump, just to keep the pump happy. And then we do have these zip tie tabs just to hold everything every so often, and that's along the entire chassis. That's all for the fuel system. We have it for the brake lines, and I also have it on this side of the chassis for the rear end vent. So it's doing the same thing on the chassis side. All that stuff's up in there, ready to go. You can see the exhaust in here. That's all pretty much finalized. I need to weld the tips out. But other than that, like the exhaust is ready. And then you can't really see it, but you can get a good underside look of like where the storage box is and the jack and all that stuff. Like all the packaging on the back of this truck, with everything in here now, like it all has its place and it looks very proper.
That is going to wrap it up for this video. We walked through a lot of the update That is going to wrap it up for this video. We did walk through a lot of the updates that Christian's been working on, all the way from the front of the truck towards the back. The next time you see this truck, it will be coated. So this is sort of the last video of all of the chassis updates and fabrication. So stay tuned for that. As always, like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.
Peace.